For the garment industry in Bangladesh, it was the worst disaster. The 2013 Rana Plaza collapse led to a global agreement to improve safety standards, but that accord could expire soon. So, who will protect the people who make many of our clothes? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. The Rana Plaza disaster 8 years ago highlighted a dark side of the global fashion industry. Workers in the developing world, many of them women and children, making clothes in dangerous conditions to be sold in wealthier nations. More than 1,100 people died when the tower collapsed in Bangladesh, the world's second biggest clothing exporter. The factories inside made garments for major European and American brands. Within 3 weeks, many heading those same brands signed a legally binding accord to improve factory conditions across Bangladesh. Rana Plaza collapsed 5 months after fire destroyed the Tarzeen Fashions factory not far away, killing 112 people. Survivors of both incidents are still dealing with the fallout.
I have to take a lot of medicines and I'm in a lot of pain. There is no income source in my family. The brands you will be speaking to, ask them to compensate us and ensure our rehabilitation and lifelong medical treatment because we are living an inhuman life.
I'm Nazma Akter. I worked for Tarzeen Fashions for 4 years. I suffered severe injuries. Both my hands got fractured, my hips were dislocated, my neck bone was damaged, my head hurt, and I couldn't see properly.
The accord on fire and building safety in Bangladesh was due to expire on Monday. It's been extended by 3 months while manufacturers and unions negotiate a replacement. More than 200 international brands signed the agreement. It covers about 1,600 factories that employ 2 million workers. In the past 5 years, more than 38,000 inspections have been carried out. Unsafe factories have been made to improve standards or had their contracts canceled. Despite the last-minute extension, the agreement may be in jeopardy. Bangladeshi manufacturers are now backing the Ready-Made Garment Sustainability Council that was set up last year. Unlike its predecessor, the new council has no legal authority to make factories comply. All right, let's bring in our guests. In Dhaka, Nazma Akter, president of Sommilito Garments Sramik Federation and a workers' rights activist. In Brussels, Vanpeperstraete, senior legal advisor at the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights. And in Geneva, Alke Boessiger, Deputy General Secretary of Uni Global Union. A warm welcome to you all. Nazma, let me start with you today. Many say that the accord on fire and building safety has led to real change in making factories far safer in Bangladesh. From your perspective, has that mostly been due to the fact that it is a legally binding agreement?
Thank you, Al Jazeera, to invite me. Yes, accord is very important and it's a legally binding and safe and protect millions of workers' life in Bangladesh because before Rana Plaza collapse, every month, every moment, there was a fire incident, building collapse. It's happened and happened. So because there is no any mechanism and legal binding where the workers can protect. But after the Rana Plaza collapse, when the hundreds of brands signed the legal binding agreement with the industrial and uni global unions, so there is a lot of remediation and a lot of action plan, fire safety, building safety, and its infrastructure, and which is very safe and protect because Bangladesh has earthquake, even a lot of factory has accident, but our workers is safe. So there is no accord, there is no regulation, there is no meaning. So we want accord should be extended and long-term sustainable agreement because just now that last moment, slightly they signed the short-term agreement. So we don't want that, but we want full phase of legal binding agreement, because accord is helping workers not only safety, also their working condition also.
Alke, I saw you nodding to a lot of what Nazma was saying there, so it looked like you wanted to jump in. But I also want to ask you, what have the roadblocks been in getting to the point where the accord was extended by 3 months? And are you concerned that it could ultimately be at risk of falling apart?
Let me say that I think we're all, from the union side, from the brand side, and from the industry side, we have a very strong interest for the RSC, for the program in Bangladesh to succeed and to continue. And in order to do that, we were able to agree this extension agreement, which really does only one thing. It buys us a little bit more time so that we can continue our negotiations for a successor agreement for the current accord, which basically would have ended today without this extension agreement. And what's really important from our point of view is that in addition to the RSC agreement, which is in place, which continues to be there for us as unions to be able to continue to play our part, we need to continue to have a strong agreement between the unions and the brands, where together we can make sure that the brands that are participating in the RSC and in any other future country programs that we want to develop can really be held accountable for the commitments that they're making under such an agreement. And also, it's important to have this independent and joint monitoring mechanism so that we don't return to the times of pre-Rana Plaza, where brands are basically doing self-monitoring or participate in voluntary programs. So these are two very important key elements for us that we want to see continue in a successor agreement.
Bin, workers' rights groups and NGOs have said that the accord has really led to significant improvement, and they also have said that it could be used as a model for other countries that have similar production facilities, especially when it comes to the garment industry. Do you agree with that? And also, could you list some of the key achievements from your perspective of the accord?
Yeah, indeed. The accord is a significant different model, notably because, as Ms. Boessiger has previously highlighted, it's a legally binding agreement between unions on the one hand and brands on the other hand to manage a specific risk in their supply chain. So we've seen the accord being extremely effective in Bangladesh in that context to identify fire and building safety risks in those brands, signatory brands' supply chains, and also remediating it, notably because brands are legally obligated to ensure that their suppliers are complying and participating in the accord program, and also that there is a solution being found for the financial implications of addressing those specific human rights risks. So we've really seen results under the first accord, that successor agreement, and there's no reason to believe that similar issues could be dealt with in other contexts like Pakistan, where fire and building safety is also an issue, or even globally, or on other issues, or even in other industries, because we see similar models also being used, for example, in Florida to deal notably with labor rights conditions in the tomato industry. So we see here a very strong model to actually address human rights risks and impacts, and delivering results in a way that we haven't seen with voluntary regimes before.
Nazma, what are the conditions right now for garment workers in Bangladesh? I mean, where do things stand? We know that conditions have improved in the factories, but have wages increased? Is there a system in place whereby workers have compensation if they get injured on the job? How is the situation for the workers?
In Bangladesh, the most of the brand come to our country or other country, whole supply chain is came to for cheap labor. So in Bangladesh, we don't have the living wage system. We have the minimum wage is less than $100. So even, in our law, it's very difficult because most of our parliament members are the business people, and they are more privileged and they get more advantage from even the legislation when amendment. If you are severely injured, then you will get 120,000 taka. It's like more than more than 1,000 euro. Or if you debt, and you will get also 1,000 euro. So that is the compensation, and it's nothing, and it's a silly. So we have some progress because Rana Plaza collapsed. When the people is a corporate murder, and it is very shame and very painful because over 1,000 workers are killed this murder. So that time they are open the door for few minimum wage increasing, and also some factory has union and few have collective bargaining. But in the main term, it's not much that, because our workers, given the COVID-19, the factory, whole Bangladesh is locked down, but they are working in the factory, the brand, the supplier, nobody's care about the brand side. They are not properly monitoring, and they are doing all the risks and hazardous work. But even our workers are not getting any risk benefit. But when they have some challenges and difficulties and raise their voice, and they send them also in COVID-19 in the prison, and also arrested and lost their job. So the condition looks like a lot of improve, but reality is not that, because as long as the living wage, freedom of association, and gender-based violence is increasing every day, and in pandemic is more and more. So these are the issue. As long as not addressing the working condition is not, and that we also scared if the accord is no longer, we need independent and neutral accord.
Ben, you were reacting to a lot of what Nazma was saying. Did you want to jump in?
No, I can only reinforce what Nazma is saying. Like Bangladesh is a state where there's still room for significant progress in terms of guaranteeing actually what are minimum standards of labor rights. I'm thinking about joining or forming union of your own choosing, or getting a salary that is right, or a safe factory. And I think what is important here again in relationship to the Accord is that the Accord, of course, only deals with fire and building safety and safety in general, but that it's important that as long as the state of Bangladesh is not guaranteeing those rights, that brands, and that's the international consensus, at least at the UN, that brands and retailers need to make sure that at least in their own supply chains, those rights are getting respected. And in that sense, the signing or the accession and the continuation of individual legally binding agreements with unions seems like a crucial step forward in order for brands to meet their expectations as outlined by the United Nations.
Alke, so we know that while improvements have been made, while conditions have gotten safer at many factories, there's still a lot more work to do. I mean, that's kind of what it boils down to, right? But I also want to ask you, what is the government's role in all this? What has the government of Bangladesh been doing when it comes to these negotiations?
So the government of Bangladesh itself is not part of our negotiations. They're, of course, the regulatory body for the industry in the country. But basically, the RSC, where the brands, the unions, and the industry are together, is a private industry initiative. It would be our interest in the future to make it the body that oversees safety in the garment industry for the entire country. But for that, a lot of investment still needs to happen, both into the local infrastructure and capacity and resources on the government side, because really it should be the government who does inspections and who oversees the health and safety standards in the industry. And until that is happening, I think it's important that we continue with this private initiative to safeguard what we have achieved, because I think there is no doubt that the industry is much improved compared to 2013 when we started. But as you rightly said, there is a lot of work to do. Even the factories that are covered by the Accord are not fully remediated. So we have a big part of work still ahead of us. And in terms of rights and improvement of rights, I think there is a lot of time that needs to pass as well. We have training programs on the ground where health and safety worker committees together with management in the factories are being set up. But those things, the attitudes to those kind of new institutions don't change overnight. And it will take some time for everybody to really grow together and work together in a natural way.
Nazma, there have been critics of the RSC that have questioned the makeup of its board. Some of these critics have said that there may be too many members that are representing companies that have financial stakes in the garment industry in Bangladesh, and that there may not be enough members who represent workers' rights organizations. I want to ask you, do you think that what the RSC has been doing has been effective? What kind of role have they been playing so far? And would they continue to be effective if this accord expires in another 3 months?
We didn't, depending, and we didn't feel comfortable, and we didn't trust at all, because, you know, we have the global union representing local union, but with the company side, they are very much look after and very much, and they are also hire the RSC head, because they will listening them. They will not listening to workers, because the accord is like the factory, when they transfer, if they are not giving proper compensation as per the accord Article 8, if they violate, and it's also legally they have to pay for the workers. And also many areas, and accord is not only work for the safety, also in my success, because when we started safety committee in the factory, and we have one factory unionized, but the factory is not accept the union. But when the safety committee established that factory, then union need to be decided who will be the safety committee member from the worker side. So then the union and the factory and brand and accord, when they have initial meeting and all workers meeting, that time they are accepted union, and that factory has also signed the collective bargaining agreement. So also we have the payment issue or any grievances, any other issues, also the working condition. It's also sometimes, many cases, we get that thing. So RSC will not be work like that. And also the accord was also asking to ask all the union, if there is gender-based violence, also they have to look after sexual harassment. So we want this kind of initiative. We want to be a sustainable model and sustainable things, and which is be very neutral and independently work for the industry as well as the workers, because we are not against the industry. Because if the factory is safe, the workers are safe, the productivity, the business will be more profit and more better way will running.
Okay.
So RSC, there is no, we don't have any liability, confidence.
Right. Alke, if the accord were to expire, and if there's no other legally binding program in its place, how would that impact the work of the RSC going forward? And what might the consequences be for workers in Bangladesh?
So as unions, we have taken a very clear position right from the beginning when the RSC was formed in June last year. We will only be part of the RSC if there is a legally binding agreement in the background between the unions and the brands. We believe we need such an agreement in place to be able to fully enforce all the commitments and obligations of brands, to hold them accountable. And we will not be part of an RSC if such an agreement is not in place. We had announced that we would withdraw from the RSC pending a new agreement. So now that we have an interim agreement, which has now been signed by, I think it was 10 brands already just after 2 hours today, we will continue to work in the RSC until the end of this extension agreement. And we hope we will be able to continue to work in the setting of the RSC beyond that, if we are able to agree a new agreement. But for us, it's a question of credibility. And we will not be part of an organization where we believe that some of these elements for real credibility are lacking.
Ben, I want to take a step back for a moment and talk about something else that's had a big impact on the economy in Bangladesh. Of course, that's the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to ask you, what has that meant for workers in the garment industry in Bangladesh? I mean, global demand for apparel has been way down because of the pandemic. So how devastating has this been for the garment industry in Bangladesh, and how devastating has it been for workers?
I think it's fair to say that it has been particularly devastating for both suppliers in Bangladesh as well as workers, because as a result of a drop in demand, and that was not necessarily a voluntary one, because lots of governments in consumer countries mandated the closure of non-essential shops, so including clothing stores, which at least forced the retailers that did not have an online presence to deal with orders that were already programmed going forward. So a number of retailers have then decided to abandon every contract or any order that they had outstanding, even if that was already agreed on, if that was already in production, if that was about to be shipped, or even if it was be shipped. And a number of brands had done so in terms that are not necessarily coherent with either their contract or statute. So, but simply because they could, because we do need to realize that in the garment industry, there is quite a significant power imbalance between brands on the one hand and suppliers on the other hand. So brands just abandoned contracts, even if they themselves still had obligations under those contracts, for example, to pay suppliers for partially incurred costs or other provisions of the contract. And suppliers largely accepted that because they were not in a position to dispute this or to enforce the contract. We've seen very little disputes about that because most suppliers, when COVID is better, more managed, want to resume those business relations. So suppliers were really between a rock and a hard place, and they themselves don't have necessarily the ability to stomach that. So they are forced to do exactly the same with their workers and ensure mass layoffs, which then puts workers on the street without, well, depending on the country, but without necessarily having access to social protection measures. So you see this whole cascading effect going down. So that decision had mass impact on the suppliers as well as on workers.
Nazma, you spoke a little earlier about just how much worry there is among the workers of the garment industry in Bangladesh about the idea that the accord might expire. You know, when you take that fear and that worry, along with the effect, the devastating effect that COVID-19 has had on the garment industry and on the economy and on the population of Bangladesh, what is it like for workers right now? How dire is the situation? How much are they concerned about the state of affairs right now?
As I earlier mentioned, that the brand from the brand side in COVID-19, they never monitoring factory in physically, only they are doing in visualize, and supplier also is not in the factory. They are at their head office or in their houses. But most our workers, 100% working in the factory, the social distance, occupational safety issues, diseases, the health, hygienic things, it's also very absent because our factory in Dhaka city, and we don't have the big cluster because it's a multi-storage building. And they are working full time, and there is no policy about the health issue, the social protection and unemployment issues. So, you know, the whole system and power is, especially the power is brand leading power, it's not sustained. So equally power is need to be done for the workers, need to be their freedom of expression and voice, and supplier also how to get the purchasing fair price. And also, you know, that without the Rana Plaza 8 years, the system has changed, but it's not. So, you know, nobody is listening. Everybody is thinking about their profit and their margin, but workers are hunger. Their life and livelihood is threatened. Most of the female workers are working, and a lot of harassment, abuse. And after 40 years old, women cannot work in the factory because they don't have the production capacity. They have sacrificed their whole youth and energy. But where these people goes, nobody is asking, nobody's talking about also them. And their children are not properly growing physically, mentally, because they don't have the breastfeeding rights and women-friendly workplace. So everything is in question, and everything is unsecurity.
Nazma, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We are out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. But I want to thank all our guests very much. Nazma Akter, bin Vanpeperstraete and Alke Boessiger. And thank you too for watching. You can see this and all of our previous programs again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.